Hey there, guys. So, as you can tell, I said in last week's thing, sort of announcement thing that I put out there, that I wouldn't be doing an episode by myself for a while, and I would try to avoid it, but whoopsie daisies, I guess I'm already lying to you guys. So I apologize. I did have a guest plan. They did pull out at the last second. Slightly annoyingly, but whatever. I still am gonna put an episode out for this week, and yeah, I hope you enjoy me talking about this film by myself for a bit. Have fun with it, I guess. Enjoy. Hello everybody, and welcome back to another episode of At the Movies with William Fletcher. As per usual, I am your host, William Fletcher, and welcome to this week's episode. So, I know in the intro I probably explained that, yeah, this episode is just going to be me this week, and I do feel bad about that. I do apologize. It was never a plan of mine, but it is what it is, and I guess we'll have to, I don't know, work with it. So yeah, this week I will be covering the Incredible Hulk film from 2008 in anticipation of the She-Hulk TV series that is releasing on Disney Plus this week. So yeah, I'm just gonna sort of talk about this film. So it's very weird watching this. So I have seen this film before years ago. I have a very, very little memory of this film at all. I really don't remember. I really don't remember a whole lot about this film. So rewatching it for the purpose of this was effectively like watching it for the first time again. And so there's just a lot of stuff in it that I really don't forget. That I did forget rather, that I don't really remember. And the only stuff that I can really think of is stuff I'd seen recently in videos and reviews and that of it. Yeah, but it's one of the weakest Marvel films to date for me. I don't think it's like bad by any means, like by any stretch of the imagination, but it's not top tier Marvel. This is sort of still in the days when Marvel was really trying to figure out what the hell they were doing. And I think that cause this was released the same year as the first Iron Man film, which is, a really one of the best MCU films, I would say, and this is not so, and I think it's interesting to sort of watch this sort of with the context, especially because it's not Mark Ruffalo in the role that is Edward Norton, and I do think Mark Ruffalo is far, far better, but I will give Norton the I don't know what the word I'm looking for is. I'll sort of give him, I'll be fairer to him because he was, he was only in the one film, whereas Ruffalo has been in far more films than that. He's been in, 4 Avengers films at the least, and, he's been in Ragnarok, and, he's been in a lot more than Edward Norton. But I think Edward Norton, if he had stayed on, if there wasn't problems with Edward Norton being involved with the film and having, the main thing is he really likes to sort of be involved in the editing and that kind of thing. I think he did that on American History X. The director, for some reason, wasn't really, like, that he was, the director wasn't particularly involved in, like, the final edit of American History X or something like that, and Edward Norton sort of stepped in, or there's, like, a problem with the editor or something, and Norton sort of, I mean, kind of notorious. It's known that he sort of gets involved, and Marvel was sort of like, nah, we're not really having that. So, they sort of canned him and put in Mark Ruffalo, who is, far better in the role, even though Edward Norton, I would say, is the better actor of the two. I think Mark Ruffalo works far better as Bruce Banner in this film. But yeah, sort of the, Edward Norton's performance is very interesting to watch, because it does feel a bit like, I do think if he had been in more films, I do reckon he probably would have been able to work better, and eventually he probably would have gotten to a point where I would think, like, yeah, he's great in this role, but sort of as it is in this film, he definitely needed a stronger script to work with to make his performance just work work better, and I feel like I think it's partly the script that lets him down as well. Like, I think, like, because I do think Edward Norton potentially could have worked in the, like, depending on the script, if it was him instead of Mark Ruffalo in, like, the first Avengers films, I think that Edward Norton could have potentially worked there. I do think it's sort of a scripting thing more than anything. Not to say that Edward Norton is particularly bad in this film or anything. He's perfectly fine, but he's not amazing. Like, he's perfect. Like, he's solid. He's fine. He's not particularly amazing or anything, but he is, sort of trying to work with what the script is giving him, and the script is really not giving him like a whole lot to work with, which is, part of the problem. I think that, like, I do think he needs, a good script. Like, I think Edward Norton, I've seen him in enough stuff, and I do think he needs a good script to help get him to work. But if if he's presented with a good script, he'll be wonderful. He'll be fantastic. As seen in various things that he's done. And I think that is sort of what lets him down. It lets all the actors down, honestly, because there aren't, there's some decent actors in this film, like Tim Roth, for example, who I love. I'm a massive Tim Roth fan, but he really doesn't work in this sort of context, in this film. And I hope that with She-Hulk, they are able to make Tim Roth work better, and I would really like to hope that they really give him something to do, and based on the trailers and what we've seen of the promotional material and everything, Tim Roth seems to be sort of a Hannibal Lecter type figure, or like Baron Zemo, how Baron Zemo was in Falcon and the Winter Soldier. He was sort of the villain there. He's sort of like the tertiary, secondary villain who's there to help the heroes with the story, a la Silence of the Lambs, Lecter's in the, that sort of thing. And I think that would have really, and I think that could be a good role for him, because I don't really buy Tim Roth as this, military, this just killer, he doesn't really work in that role. He doesn't have the look, which I think is the problem. I think that's one of the sort of main problems with this, is he doesn't look like he would be in the military, and he's supposed to, and that's sort of a problem. There's multiple scenes where he's shirtless, and he isn't, I would have expected him to be, ripped and to have abs, or to have sort of, to be, in good physical shape, but you sort of watch the film and he's not really, and it just sort of looks weird, and I can't put him in that, that sort of, I can't sort of have that sort of framework, that sort of idea in my mind of like, this is, a military guy, But again, I don't know. I feel like Tim Roth really should have worked harder and gotten into shit, because that's just sort of the comic book thing now, is actors get in ridiculous shape for roles so they look the part, and Tim Roth, they didn't, clearly, but the rest of the cast is, in sort of a general sense, it's all fine. Like, none of the acting's particularly terrible or anything, but none of it's particularly great either. Liv Tyler is very, the MCU took them, years to figure out how to write female characters, and even now they're not particularly great, but they're getting better. And man, do they is Betty Ross not particularly but like Betty Ross is just not interesting. And again, it's not the actor's fault or anything, it's just that the writing needs to be stronger, and when you have bad, or weak writing rather, I wouldn't go as far, well, some of it's bad, some of it's weak, some of it's like fine, But when you have weak writing, it doesn't help when you've got actors who need good scripts to be good, you know. We've got William Hurt in it as Thunderbolt Ross. Again, he's fine. I don't particularly care for his character in these films. You've got Ty Burrell, who I think is, I don't think he's amazing or anything. I just know him from Modern Family, and he's relatively entertaining in that. And, you've got Robert Downey Jr. at the end of the film as Tony Stark, it's Robert Downey Jr. as Tony Stark. You can't go wrong with him. He's always, quite a bit of, but, it's just, I don't know, it's just not particularly good. I think, the film is weird, because there's some really good stuff, but there's also some really bad stuff and some pretty weak stuff. I think the score is strangely good and sort of I don't know, it doesn't really fit per se. It just is, and it just has a vibe of this is, it sort of gets you sort of pumped up, and it just goes hard, it really is just there, and it just is this isn't what I was sort of expecting. It's just so, out of place, but it kind of works, and I kind of like it. It's sort of one of the better MCU scores. And I think the MCU scores are pretty solid. I think there's some really good music in the MCU. I think the main Avengers theme by Alan Silvestri is great. I think all the stuff Michael Giacchino's done and Danny Elfman have done, I think that their stuff is really great. I think that there is good music in the MCU, but this is certainly a very interesting sort of elements of score in there, and I think it's certainly interesting. But there's also just tons of other sort of weird elements, the Stan Lee cameo is him dying. That's just, I don't like that. That's a terrible thing to do to Stan Lee, is have him die. Cause I think Stan Lee cameos really shouldn't be too much, and they also shouldn't really affect the plot, because the Stan Lee cameo in this is quite important to the plot. He, for those, if you haven't seen it or you don't remember, there's a bit in the film where Bruce gets cut. He's helping an electrical thing, and he gets cut, and he gets blood, and he's Eddie, blood. It sort of, there's a couple drops of blood that go sort of falling through a grate or whatever, and he's worried, and he thinks he gets it, but then we see it, and there's, a bottle with blood sort of dripping down slowly, and that just isn't noticed by anyone, apparently. But yeah, it gets in, and then Stanley drinks it, and then I say he dies, I don't even know if he dies, he just doesn't go well, and then that leads them to, South America, where Bruce is sort of hiding out South America where Bruce is hiding out. So, the Stan Lee cameo, affects the plot, and I don't like that. I really don't think the Stan Lee cameos should be affecting the plot in any significant way, or in any way, really. There's certain, sort of the older ones, back in the X-Men films and the Raimi Spider-Man films, he's just there he's usually just in, the background, in the first Tobey Maguire Spider-Man, it's just him running, and in X-Men it's him just sort of on a beach, just sort of staring at I think it's the senator or whatever coming out of the ocean, and he's all blobby and stuff. But I just don't think, this is one of the weaker Stan Lee cameos, just in general, not just in the MCU, just in general. I just think that this film is it's very strange. The effects, CGI and all that hasn't aged particularly well, and I kind of fit, especially when you've got the sort of final battle between Hulk and Abomination, I think is pretty solid and looks decent. It's not, it's not amazing effects or anything, but I think the final battle works, because it's, sort of too, I don't think it's particularly bad, but it's when Hulk is or Abomination are sort of interacting with sort of real tangible elements, like when Hulk picks up Betty Ross, for example, and holds her, or like she's on him when he's like, when Hulk is what is it? He's strapped down to like a table to get his blood taken out or whatever, and Betty is sort of on top of him. That looks really strange, but I think the sort of the final battle looks really good. I think some of the effects are pretty solid. I don't think there's I wouldn't go as far to say that the effects are again they're fine, but I do think the first Iron Man, for example, which came out the same year, looks pretty good. It has. I don't feel like it's dated especially badly. I don't think I think most of the MCU stuff, the sort of older MCU stuff, looks pretty solid. I mean, hell, even some of this MCU CGI now looks worse than stuff we had, back in the early days of the MCU. I do think some of it hasn't aged well. I think sort of modern MCU CGI already looks terrible compared to sort of some of the older stuff. But this, I feel like, I don't know, it sort of seems like this Incredible Hulk film was sort of the, cause they had, two films, they had Iron Man and the Incredible Hulk, and it kind of seems like they might have spent more time on Iron Man and really making sure that works, which I do think is fair as an idea, because it is, I mean, Iron Man is, for all intents and purposes, Iron Man is the main character of this franchise, and I do think you probably do want to put more time and effort and care into a film about a character who is going to be leading the franchise for the next decade plus, he is, he's important, and whereas Hulk, cause people are familiar with Hulk, and, cause they did, there was the Hulk TV series in the 70s, which I've seen various episodes of. It's a lot of fun, actually. I don't think it probably isn't an amazing show if I go back to it, but it's a lot of fun. Lou Ferrigno is Hulk, who is in this film as a cameo. I think he must have cameoed in the 2003 Hulk film or something, and plus his vocals are added to Hulk when he talks, which I think is a bit weird. I think Hulk talking is kind of a bit strange. But yeah, anyway, I think cause sort of Hulk was, sort of get back to my point, Hulk is sort of a well-known character. He was sort of one of the he's sort of one of those Marvel, because DC for years, people knew who Batman were, and Superman, and Wonder Woman, and the Flash, and even Aquaman, and all that, whereas Marvel, I mean, you had Spider-Man, everybody, knew Spider-Man, he had comics, and, he'd had TV shows, and animated TV shows and live action stuff since the 60s, so everybody knew who Spider-Man was. Plus there's the Raimi trilogy, all before the MCU, plus Hulk had his own TV series in the 70s, and that was the Ang Lee Hulk film, which I haven't seen, but I have heard is pretty bad, but characters like, Iron Man, Thor, Captain America, sort of cultural icons now, and sort of film icons as well, is, like that, the initial six Avengers are cultural icons in film now. People know who these characters are. I was out, I was out at work today, and I just heard, a little 4-year-old kid, there was a book, and he's like, "Look, mommy, it's Iron Man," and I think that really says to the power, because I don't think, because I think if this was, pre-MCU, and there was a book with Iron Man on it, a kid probably wouldn't be like, "Oh, look, that's Iron Man." They might be like, "Oh, that looks cool. What's that? I want to get that." But they wouldn't be like, "Oh my god, it's Iron Man." But now, these are recognizable icons and heroes to a lot of people, arguably, and, you sort of want to spend more time and care on a film where the main character of your franchise is not a particularly well-known character. Whereas Hulk, you probably, not to say they didn't put care and time and effort into it, because that seems harsh, and I'm certain they put a lot of work into this film, but it seems like they probably wouldn't have been as concerned if this film didn't do as well, because people knew who Hulk was, because he was a well-known, sort of figure, and he was well known, to the sort of level of some of the DC, to some of DC's biggest characters, So this film, it sort of feels like not like it's like they're lazy or they're not putting effort in or they're not caring or anything, but it sort of feels like I don't know, like something about it just feels off in comparison to sort of the rest of the MCU, and it might be the fact that it was produced and sort of distributed by Universal, and they currently sort of own the rights to this film, which is why there won't be, at least not for the foreseeable future, a solo Hulk film in the MCU anymore, because I don't know the sort of the sort of legal stuff behind it, or the sort of context of sort of how and why Universal owns the rights to making Hulk films, but they don't, Disney don't own the rights to it, so they can't do solo Hulk films, so they've been basically just doing his storylines in other films. That's what Ragnarok was, and then his sort of story in Ragnarok connected to the next two Avengers films and all that, but yeah, and I think, to be honest, I don't know how doing a Hulk film, how well it would work now. I feel like it would, I don't know, I don't know, because I think it would depend. I think if they did a Hulk film, like a solo Hulk film with Mark Ruffalo, I do reckon they could probably make it work just about. Plus, there's like sort of a setup in this film. There's one of the characters, Mr. Blue is his sort of nickname, and he gets like Banner's blood, like he has like a cut in his head and he gets Banner's blood, and then his head starts to expand, and I think he becomes the leader, I think is the character that they were sort of setting up and hinting towards, and I don't know, and they haven't done anything with that since, presumably because they don't have the rights to make solo Hulk films, but potentially they could introduce him back in the She-Hulk series, because it's one of those weird Marvel things that like sort of is set up in an early film and then they don't really call back to it or pay it off at any point, and maybe it's because Universal owns the rights to it, so they can't really do a whole lot with it, but I would like them to wrap it up, because I'm someone who likes loose ends to be tied up. If something's setting up for something, if they're setting up for a movie or whatever, then I would really like it if they did that, but they are not, at least not for the foreseeable future, which is kind of annoying, but it is what it is. And so then there's the sort of the final battle between Hulk and Abomination, and I actually should say, before I talk about the scene and then, sort of wrap the whole thing up, the dialogue, the script is very cheesy. There's so many subtle in-jokes and references and sort of foreshadowing elements, and it's just like, I don't particularly care for this, and I don't like it. Again, I think it speaks to early days Marvel, but, I think it's probably the, not lack of care per se, but rather they were sort of more, they weren't as, I guess, worried about this film. Like, I feel like I don't know. But there's just so many, like, there's a bit where where Edward Norton's Banner holds up a pair of pants and expecting people to go like, oh my god, because, like, the Hulk, he wears purple pants and everything, and the dialogue is just like, oh, an abomination, and all that. I don't particularly care for it. The script is very, at times, it's very cheesy, and I don't. It does not work for me particularly, but I think like the thing that really works for me and far and away is my favorite bit of the film is the final sort of battle between Hulk and Abomination, because sort of throughout the film, Emil Blonsky, Tim Roth's character, he was injected with something so he could deal with Hulk, but then he's kicked into a tree and his entire body breaks basically, and then he heals rapidly, and then he takes another serum and he's like getting sweaty, and then he's getting weird spines out of his back and everything. And it's just like, okay, so sort of setting up towards him becoming a monster, an abomination as it were, and then he takes more of Banner's sort of blood or whatever it is, and then he becomes Abomination, and then, yeah, it's Hulk, and then Hulk versus Abomination is the sort of final battle, and it's just two big, sort of monsters beating the shit out of each other, and I really like it. I thought it was a lot of fun. And it's just, because you don't really see that, because we haven't really seen anything like that, with Hulk pretty much since. I mean, there was the sort of Thanos thing, but he doesn't really do too well on that, and it's not particularly long either. But, I think it really is, I really like it in this film, the final battle, and then, it is very brutal, Hulk, he gets stabbed by Abomination, sort of elbow spike, Jesus. Every time I have to say spike, but, and then, he grabs the chain and he starts whipping, and he's gonna, do stuff to him, and then Hulk does the Hulk smash, and he smashes the ground, and he falls, and he gets the chain, and he starts choking him out, and and then Hulk stabs Abomination with his, elbow spike, and yeah, it's really brutal action, I really like it, and, I kind of wish the entire film had been as entertaining as that, because it might be one of my favorite MCU films, honestly, if it had been that entertaining, but as is, it's a perfectly decent film, with a really cool fight scene at the end, and then, sort of a setup of Tony Stark. It's not even a post-credit scene or mid-credit scene or anything, it's just Tony Stark, he's there, and he's like, yep, we're putting a team together, and then the movie ends. It's very weird, and it's the only MCU film without a post-credit scene, but it's effectively, it's the equivalent of that, it just didn't really do that. But yeah, it's a fine MCU film, it's one of the weakest MCU films, but I do enjoy elements of it, and I do wish that the She-Hulk show will do something interesting with Tim Roth and make him, interesting in the MCU. So I'm giving this film a 6 out of 10. It's a relatively strong 6, but it's not particularly high or anything like that. So yeah, I hope you all enjoyed listening to this week's episode. Apologies for me being the only one on this week. It was not my plan, but that's just how life works sometimes. So yeah, I hope you enjoyed. Check out the previous episodes, and I will see all of you guys in the next one. Goodbye.